Alright, welcome to the second video in our series looking at coding our prototypes for our digital solutions projects. So in our previous lesson, we spent a bit of time setting up our object library. So from our class diagram that we've modeled previously, setting up, the structure of our objects, so the attributes and then the methods that they will perform. So we will talk about adding in the algorithms into the methods in a future video. However, in this one, we'll focus on setting up our interface. And the reason why we're looking at setting up our interface first is by the end of this video, you'll now have a basic skeleton that you can use for any data-driven application that you are developing for digital solutions. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create a couple of new files. So I'm going to go ahead and create two new text files. And as we always do, the very first thing once we've created is to save them. So again, make sure you're saving them in the same location as your library folder. So I'm going to create one called main.py, which is going to be, our main Python function for controlling the application. And then our second text file, or currently text file, I'm going to call screens.kv. So .kv creates what is known as a Kivy file. And so Kivy is a library which is attached to Python or used in Python to create GUIs, so graphical user interfaces. There is obviously other libraries that you can use, or other packages, I should say, that you can use. So things like Tkinter, that's the only one I can think of off the top of my head. There is a lot to choose from. But Kivy, uses an object-oriented approach, which, in line with our object library that we've just created, is allowing for that greater flexibility and also adaptability across projects, as opposed to something that's a bit more procedural based. So we'll set up in our main Python file first. And the very first thing we want to do is actually import Kivy into this, so we can access some of the, control elements in particular of Kivy. And while we're into importing, I know I just closed it down, but we're going to import our library as well. So if we import lib, assuming that you're saving the library Python file in the same folder as the main Python file, it will actually locate that and import all of those objects and their associated attributes and methods into our system or into our program. Alright, so from Kivy, there's a few libraries that we want to access. So within the Kivy package, the first one being the app, and we want to import the app object. So this is what actually builds our window so that we can put all our GUI elements within it. Save that. So from the Kivy package in the language library, we want to import an object called builder. So lowercase u. And so what builder does is allow us to use different Kivy files as we need to throughout our application. And saying that, we will only need one Kivy file in this particular instance, but the advantage of using builder is we don't have to necessarily worry about the naming of the KV file. The other one that we want to access is from the UIX library, and in particular the screen manager library within. So we want to import the screen manager and also the screen object. So the screen is like an individual view in Kivy, and the screen manager is what allows us to transition between those views. So for the purpose of this video and these activities, I'm only going to focus on 3 of the interfaces. So the initial login window, the adding of a task by a user, and then the viewing of the task by the user. And the reason why I'm doing that is it's going to just allow us to focus on those concepts of data input and data output. So with the creating of the task and the viewing of the task, as well as with the login application, it's actually going to allow us to look at our algorithms, because a lot of the CRUD algorithms are going to rely on SQL. So again, depending on which unit you're watching this video in, will determine, I guess, how important SQL is to you, or even your understanding of SQL up to this point. So again, save our work as we go. And so then we're going to create our screen. So as I said, we're going to have 3 screens, and each screen is a particular object. So we're going to create the blueprint for that object by declaring a class. I'll call it login screen. And in the parentheses, we will add some information this time, saying that this login screen object is an example of a screen object. All right, and we're just going to pass because we don't necessarily have to set any information in it just yet. I call my second screen task input. It's also a screen. Just create a little bit more space. And task output, so where we're going to view our tasks. What's going to happen? Scroll up to give us some breathing space there. We've got our 3 screens, so we also have to build our application. So if we were to use the classical Kivy naming conventions, we would call this screens app, which is an instance of an app. And so what Kivy would do is look, because we've called it screens app, would look for a KV file called screens.kv, which is what we called ours. But obviously screens app doesn't make a lot of sense in our context. So I'm going to change it to say planner app. And as I said, I'm going to use the builder object to define that this is the specific KV file we want. We don't have to create a KV file called planner.kv. Obviously, if you wanted to, that would be okay. But screens, I guess, is a bit more generic. And as I said, because we're looking at generic things like login screens, data input, data output, we may want to use these in multiple applications. All right, so now that we've got our object set up, we can go in and actually put together our app. So there is a predefined method in the Kivy apps called build. So if we define the build for this app, the first thing we want to do is use the builder object to load our file. And then in the parentheses, we put the name of the file we want to load. So screens.kv. Next, what we want to do is we want to create our screen manager. I'm just going to call it SM. And that SM is an instance of the screen manager object. So then with our SM object that we've created, we can go in, and even though we're adding screens, the method for that is called add widget. So a little bit confusing, but I guess all you need to know is that it is called add widget, the action to add a screen. All right, so in the parentheses, I put that we want to create or add the widget of our login screen object that we've created up here. So again, we want to practice the pattern. So we're going to type this out for each one. So we're adding another widget for our task input object. And our screen manager, we're adding a third widget for our task output. So once each of our widgets is added, we can then return the screen manager from this method. So this will add the screen manager into our application window and will allow us to see all of the screens. Remember, Control S is your friend, save your work as you go. The final step is a bit of a generic line of code, or 2 lines of code, I guess, to be entirely accurate. And that is if dunder name double equals, because it's a condition that we're looking at. So if dunder name is equal to, and then in quotation marks you'll see dunder main planner app.run. So basically what this line of code, or 2 lines of code, is doing is checking that the name of this file is equal to the main file of our project. And then in that case, we run our planner app. So a common misconception that people make with this is that they believe that main is attached because it's called main.py. And that's not entirely the case. So if I was to file save this as something else, so, you know, for whatever reason you called it project.py, all right, so it no longer equals main. When we run this application, it will still work. So you can see when I run it, it's going through the process, and because this isn't my main screen, my window is opened up elsewhere. So if I bring that across, you can now see we've got an application window with the planner at the title because that's the name of the application. All right, so obviously if you change the planner name, you change the name at the top. And currently there's nothing in there, but that's purely because we haven't added any elements into our login screen, which is obviously the first screen that we see. All right, so again, the main name equals main. Right, this main doesn't refer to the fact that it's called main.py. It refers to the fact that this is the main file that we're running it from. So if we're in, you know, screens.kv or our library, we press the play button. You shouldn't actually be able to press the play button in our screens.kv file. But if you actually try to run it from the library, you'll notice that nothing happens. This is the only place where anything will happen. Okay, so we've now got the basic Python setup for our interface. We now want to focus on the actual look of the interface. I might just close this down and just make sure I did save it correctly. I will open up the main.py. That's all looking nice. We don't really need that other than to test, so I will open that back up. Make a decision on that. There we go. All right, so actually what we might do, just to make things a bit simpler for people following along, is we might finish this video here. So what we've done is we've imported our key Kivy objects that we can interact with in Python. We've created our 3 views that we want to focus on. Obviously for our full prototype, we can then add in more views and add them as widgets within our application build. And I guess in line with what we talked about in the first session, for those of you that are a bit more advanced, the first video, not first session. For those people that are a bit more ahead, a bit more advanced, thinking, well, can't we just loop through all of these? You certainly can. But again, when we're first learning how to interact with this stuff, it is useful to type it all out. And then obviously our last bit, which just allows us to actually run our application and make sure that, well, I guess the reason why we run it is to test as we go. Alright, so as promised in the next video, we'll start to flesh out our Kv file and actually see some interface objects in our screen.